Hey, I'm Raymond. You're watching RPadTV, and we have a tribalistic, antagonistic, masochistic, episode for you today. Joining me today are the excellent Paul Semmel and the wonderful Mac Marshall. What's going on, guys?
Hello.
Anything new or exciting in Los Angeles?
I am not a fan of the rain.
Yes, most Angelinos are not.
It's like the only big new thing, and it's funny because like I'm teaching one of my kids to drive like on the road, and she's got a permit, and I was like, so this is a cool experience because now you get to see everybody lose like 50% of their mentality just because it's wet out, right? And like, sure enough, every time we're on the road, like when it's raining out, something weird happens in front of her, and I'm like, just go straight, you're fine, like it's good. Just this is what happens.
Now, for those not familiar with Southern California, can you explain what happens when it rains and how drivers are?
Okay.
I'm going to call Paul Corner.
Okay. So when you drive, oil and other things fall off the bottom of your car and they soak into the pavement. Now, if you live places where it rains, all that stuff comes up to the surface when it rains and washes away. That's why it's a little more dangerous to drive when it rains. The thing is, if you live, say, on the East Coast where it rains all the time, not a lot builds up before it starts to get brought up. But in California, where it doesn't rain for like 10 months stretches, it builds up and it builds up and it builds up. So our roads become especially slick. However, the other thing is that a lot of people who live here come from somewhere else, but for some weird reason, they forget how to drive in the rain. It's the weirdest thing. I don't understand it. Like you see people driving down the highway 70 miles an hour when it's torrential rain out, and you would think they should know better.
Maybe slow down a bit. Like, I don't know.
You know, yeah. Like they have a sticker on the back of their car that says Cornell. So it's like, okay, you're from the East Coast. But no, for some weird reason, people seem to forget, and I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. It's like maybe a blocking of the sunlight or something. Like it just removes like I'd say like 30 to 50% of people's brain functionality behind the wheel. So like people just make very weird, irrational decisions while they're driving in the rain in California.
I mean, our weed is good, but it's not that good. It doesn't make you forget how to drive in the bad weather. But
Paul, when you mentioned Cornell, I thought you were trying to make some correlation between driving skills and Ivy League education or something.
No. I don't know why Cornell came to mind, but it just,
Well, Ithaca sucks weather-wise, so I totally get what.
But it's an East Coast school.
Yes.
You're from, But anyway.
Yes.
I don't get it.
Oh my God, we have a first terrible joke. Are you sure it doesn't say Colonel instead of Cornell? No, because chicken does not have to do with driving skills either. And that's the only Colonel you could possibly be talking about.
Drastically increased your driving skills though. Like you just ate chicken and then you drove and you're like way better than normal.
Or you might be questioning, why is he crossing the road? And you're just stumped for a while. So guys, I wanted to talk to you about video game fans and console wars and why the discussions have gotten so heated and terrible. And Paul brought this up the other day when he was talking about the reaction to Microsoft announcing that they were going to release some of their games on other platforms. Like there was a segment of fans that just went nuts and felt there was like a Judas-like betrayal on
Microsoft. That no matter what, man. Like,
yeah. Like when I was growing up, I had Atari, and one of my childhood friends had ColecoVision, and we thought this was awesome because we would get to play each other's games. We didn't fucking fight about it and be like, my console is better than yours. Like growing up, you guys, I mean, what do you remember about friends with different consoles or that community in general, the gaming community? Was it always divisive? When did it become divisive that you've noticed? Mac, I'll give this one to you.
And so I grew up, I'm sure we're all in the same kind of era, but like I got like the Magnavox Odyssey instead of the Atari, right? And that was because my dad worked at Magnavox at that time, so he just brought.
Ah,
I was like, this is super cool. But I was never allowed to have like the the actual Nintendo when Nintendo came out, and so we always had to go to friends' houses, and friends had everything from Segas to everything else at the time. And then I think to answer your question though, like I think the tribalism really started probably in like the early PlayStation and Xbox days, right? Because at that point, like I'm PlayStation was first, I believe, right? And then
yeah.
so when Microsoft came out, you probably had like this group of already Microsoft fanatics who were also gamers, and then I think at that point you just kind of got between like the which camp are you in, because the pricing for those things, right, was like you couldn't have all of them, you had to have one or the other. Right. So like most people were just like in this camp, and like again, Sony was first. So there's probably a lot of console gamers who were just ingrained in like PlayStation generationally through the years, and then Microsoft comes in and captures like a whole new audience. And I think I don't know, it's weird because I go the same way as you. Like I just want to play every game that's good on every platform that's worth playing on. But
Right.
I feel like like I said, I feel like that tribalism came into play with like the introduction of like the current name generation consoles between like Xbox and PlayStation, and even Nintendo for that matter too, right? Like they have their own just dedicated core, only going to play Nintendo games fan base, right? So.
Right, but I mean, in my experience, the Nintendo guys love their stuff, but they don't
hate.
Yeah, they don't shit on other people's
right.
games.
I think that's the difference, because like even before Microsoft got into this, there was always the sort of PC versus console people, and there was like there was also the handheld versus home console thing. It really didn't seem to get antagonistic until the era of the PlayStation 3 and the Xbox 360. And I actually don't even think it's connected to those consoles. I think what it is that's when you started to have this generation come up, which I always sort of refer to as the participation trophy generation. Which are, people who were always told that they were precious little snowflakes, and they were never told no, and they were never criticized. And as a result, they can't handle it when other people hate something they like. And they really don't like it when other people like something they hate. And that's kind of where the aggression between the Xbox fanboys and the PlayStation fanboys really kind of ratcheted up. And that's really where it is. Like, you don't see this kind of anger between PC people and console people anymore, or people who play mobile and stuff. I mean, there's always going to be like, someone who's going to be a jerk, comic book guy in The Simpsons doesn't exist for no reason. This kind of stuff has always kind of happened, but it seems the aggression really started when you had people who just couldn't handle it, that like somebody else was saying, oh no, I don't like that, and they would just flip out over it.
And I think like sometimes too, like whether it's the media leading the community to kind of be combative about it, but right, like there's always so many stories now, like every year when a new console comes out or the new systems are coming, like which one's going to be more powerful, like is this one going to have better graphics, is this one going to have better this, better that? And so it kind of creates a divide of like, oh, I'm going for this one because the graphics are so much better if you're on PlayStation, but then people are making similar arguments but from their camp on the so, and it just seems like every time there's a new console launch that comes out, they're playing up those same vibes of like where can we compete against like these, and what's the kind of competitive talking points, and then that gets everybody going on this one's better, that one's better, and then it just kind of fosters that fanboy, like I gotta be in one boat or the other kind of mentality.
Those are both excellent points that I do want to touch on. Paul mentioned that it's maybe a generational thing, but I also wonder, is it also a cultural thing? Because in the early days of consoles, it was the center of the universe was Japan, when it was, Sega and Nintendo. and Sony later on. But as Microsoft got into it, and as shooters and sports games became the dominant genres, the Western developers and the Western publishers had a bigger say in the console world. And I do wonder if elements of Western culture versus Japanese culture, which is generally more respectful, if that seeped into the gaming world. Do you see an aspect of that at all?
I totally do. Right. Like I see like I was funny. I was watching something the other day, and there was like a clip of Mike Tyson talking about like the and I think a lot of us have been saying this for a long time, how like people have just become much too comfortable talking shit behind like a camera and a monitor and not just punch to the mouth, right? And I think like, to me, who came up on the front end of like Call of Duty and like competitive multiplayer games becoming more like, I remember growing up and playing like sports games and things like that with my friends, even if it was like couch co-op, right? But like you played, you talked shit for a second, but it was fun and you won, and that was, or you lost and that was it. And then now like the shit talking is like so extensive, and it just feels like those kind of really hyper competitive games have led those personality types who just can't seem to lose, can't be their own fault. They just suffer from like main character kind of syndrome about everything.
Yes.
Right. If they lose, the shit talking, goes, so deep. And then at that point, you're talking about people who are like marrying themselves to like the one device or the other. So if if you cut deep on like talking shit about like Call of Duty on PlayStation, or like that's like, oh man, you can't say that, right? Like that it's the Xbox, and then you're just cutting people deep like every time you kind of pick a side. And I think that everybody's talking shit, right? Nobody's afraid of the consequences, and that just devolves into kind of this tribalism that everybody's standing up, like I said, to die on a hill that, to be honest, like half of them probably don't even care about that much. It's just the moment.
How about you, Paul? Do you see a cultural element in it, or?
I think that's certainly part of it. But I think what I said earlier about the sort of, participation trophy thing, that's out of the culture, that's perfectly cultural, and it, there are certain meatheads who get, like you said, go too far with competition, but they do that with, when they're playing sports or doing anything. I think that the specific to this console thing, though, I also think that there's I noticed a weird bit of it's hard to describe, but I don't actually buy it a lot of times. Like when I see a lot of people talking about, oh, this console is better than this console, like a lot of times I read their comment, and it's impossible to tell, of course, but like it doesn't seem genuine. Like, I don't really believe that like, I feel like you feel that maybe you think you believe that and you're saying that, but deep down, like, no, you don't.
Some guys just like to stir the pot.
Well, there's that.
You don't really care about that much.
I'm not just talking about that, but I'm just talking about people that really don't, who claim to like believe this stuff, but really don't.
Okay.
So there's a guy that we all know named Michael Futter. He used to do the news for Game Informer. And what he told me once is that every couple of months, Sony would issue a statement saying it was a quarterly earnings report. And in it, they would say that, how many games they sold, how many consoles they sold. Mm-hmm. So Michael would put up a story on the website, and it would say, today Sony announced that they have sold X number of game consoles and X number of games. And immediately he would get angry comments on that story. Oh, you're in the pocket of PlayStation.
Right.
You hate Xbox. And then the next day, he would get the earnings report from Microsoft, and he would do the equivalent story, and literally no opinion whatsoever. It was just, this is what they said, blah, blah, blah. And he would get accused of it. But he said that, like, there were a lot of times he was like, really? Like, he said, like, he didn't really buy it half the time. And what I and it's funny that we're talking about this now, because I was reminded of this last week when I was reading a lot of these reviews of Madam Web on social media.
All the
And literally 99% of them were like, this is the worst movie I've ever seen in my entire life. And then there'd be a couple that were like, yeah, it was okay. But then you'd get these ones that are like, this is the best movie ever made. Like, this is the best comic book movie. I love this movie. And every single one of them read like it was written by AI. Every single one of them.
The reviews I've been reading were like,
I know what you're talking about.
The reviews I've read were like Sydney Sweeney needed to be naked more than this would have been.
Well, there's that. There's always that crowd, But like there were a lot of these like reviews that were like not. It wasn't just like, oh, I like the movie. It was like, this is the best comic book movie ever made, and they all read really disingenuously. Like, and I feel that's way about the console thing, that like you have people who, they say this, but they don't always like really sound convincing. Like, it's like, I don't really buy that you're this angry about this. How can you be like,
how can this make you that upset?
Yeah. And I admit that some of that is me, because I look at this and go, what, why do you care? Like, how can you be this angry about it? Like, and here's the thing. I understand some of the frustration. If you bought a PlayStation because you wanted to play God of War and thought like, oh, I'm also going to get to play all of Bethesda's games, and then Bethesda gets bought by Microsoft, and now you may not get to play Bethesda's games, I understand why you'd be annoyed. Why you would threaten violence, why you would throw things across the room. I don't know.
But I mean, that's a danger with any third-party publisher, though.
Right.
Acquisition can happen to any third-party publisher.
Right. Yep. But people do this stuff. In fact, there was a whole big thing apparently going into the Super Bowl. Somebody put together like a whole bunch of TikTok videos of guys who were watching their favorite football team. Their favorite football team lost the playoff, so they didn't get to go to the Super Bowl. And you see the guy get up and smash his television.
Yeah.
What? Why would you do that? Why would you, like, I understand, like, if you wanted a new television, you're looking for an excuse. Okay, but like, this wasn't that. This was like,
part of that, I think, is TikTok culture. Sometimes people are doing this shit just to go viral.
Well, but people have always done that.
Day that somebody tries to like do one of those like trick a consumer at Target things, like like you see all those like that same culture, just like, oh, let's prank everybody everywhere all the time. Like,
right.
Just not for me.
Yeah.
Carlos says those videos are hilarious when they involve cowboy fans. Like, for what, the last 15 years or whatever. I did not do this in the beginning, but I wanted to talk a little bit about why I wanted both of you on. Paul, of course, is a longtime video game journalist who has written for a number of enthusiast and mainstream magazines. So he has an interesting perspective, whether it's writing for your typical gamer magazines or writing for men's magazines, or in some cases, Gene Simmons' Tongue magazine, which is an actual magazine. And Mac, he has worked at publishers like Interplay and Activision, who've released games for all kinds of platforms, and now works for a hardware company that makes hardware for all these different platforms. Now, Mac, earlier you mentioned the marketing aspect of it and how some of these companies kind of like stoke the fire. I remember seeing ads like, our console does 12 million polygons, theirs only does 10 million, or stuff like that. And I mean, I've always been on the mind of who gives a shit? Like, are the games fun? that's what matters to me. I don't care that this has better ray tracing or whatever.
Yeah, I don't have a fine enough eye to like discern the differences at that level, like that other people are like. I don't even, to be honest, like I wouldn't even know if my TV is able to produce the difference between like a maxed out Xbox and a maxed out PS5. Like maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I haven't looked into it that much. But like you said, like I play to enjoy the games. But so what was your question on like the marketing aspect of it then?
Do they enjoy this kind of divisiveness? Does it help them?
I think it depends. And like I can give a couple like, examples, but like, I'll go back to early days of Activision and Call of Duty, right? Like Call of Duty, like the hardcore fanism, right? Like when Call of Duty became a thing, everybody was like, oh, well, this is just Medal of Honor. And then you were either in Medal of Honor or Call of Duty camp, right? And then, Call of Duty evolves and becomes Call of Duty that's made by Infinity Ward, or Call of Duty that's made by Treyarch, or Call of Duty that's made by Sledge. And then, so now you have the Call of Duty fans that are divided amongst themselves going like, oh man, which is the best Call of Duty? Which studio is the best? And everybody just becomes so tribal in each little thing. And I think from time to time, like, studios will lean into it. Like I remember working on Prototype, which is a game that was on Activision, and another game from Sony was coming out at the same time called Infamous.
Oh, right? Yeah.
And we ended up, it was a very similar game that we kept going back and forth, that like their marketing team would do something and when we were watching, and then we would do something and they were watching us. And so we kind of had we were stoking that back and forth of having fans kind of decide which game is better and why. And then eventually Infamous, I think Infamous as a series went on, had like a little bit of a longer like shelf life, just because Prototype got absorbed in the merger. There was a second game and then nothing after that. But yeah, I certainly think that when companies are smart and it's not destructive, if you want to call it that, right? Like if you're fostering some good kind of, there's nothing wrong with like fostering, fanfare, but it's when it kind of crosses that line, it becomes like, like friends on your feed just having a go at each other, and you're like, "Hey, everybody, hold, slow down! Like this is not what we wanted." Everybody just like, be civil to each other. And I think that's, if you can kind of do that, I think there is an angle to kind of use it to generate awareness and buzz in a positive way, even though it is kind of using a little bit of kind of fans kind of having their opinions on things.
You do have to be careful with that stuff, though.
Yeah.
I remember I thought of this as we were preparing for this video. There was a press conference that Sony did at E3, and they padded the hell out of it, and it ran long. And the thing was, it was very obviously designed to run long because Microsoft's press conference was right after it, and they were kind of being cheeky. And the funny thing is, it wound up backfiring on them because Sony ended up looking like dicks. Their press conference got lambasted for being padded out and for being boring. And Microsoft wound up looking like the good guys. And, so you have to be like, friendly competition is a good thing. In business.
Right. There's a fine line there. And going back to this press conference thing, I remember one example of that, but was much more innocent, where if we all remember a lovely blue-haired lady that worked for Sega during the Dreamcast days, her team went in front of the Sony conference and took sidewalk chalk and put the Sega swirl everywhere. And I think that's funny and cute and doesn't disrupt, it doesn't ruin anyone's day. So
we bought the bus bench when I worked at Activision. We bought the bus bench that was right across the street from EA's building, and we bought it and put Call of Duty on that. And like the next year, they bought the bus bench that was right across the street from Activision and did the same thing. So it's it's all good fun when it's like that.
That's funny. And that's great. Whereas the example that Paul gave, that's dickish.
Yeah.
That's a dick move.
Yeah.
So,
but they never did it again.
Yeah.
That's the thing. They learned their lesson.
Yeah.
Because you're not only inconveniencing your competitor, but you're inconveniencing any journalists that have to cover both events, any publishers that have to be at both events.
I was gonna say, like on the editorial side, like anybody who was like delayed and just like I think like Sony forgot that they're screwing all of your schedules too.
Right.
Like, and that's that same main player syndrome, right? Like only thinking of yourself.
There is an excellent Reddit subreddit, by the way, called, I think it's called like I Am the Main Character, where it has all these people posting videos where they think they're posting some revealing thing, but they're just posting how self-absorbed and stupid they are, and people are calling them out on it. It's a fun subreddit. So I wanted to take a little detour and talk about the internet's place in fanboyism and console wars. Because when we first started, there were magazines only. and there weren't really a way for readers to interact much. Then internet forums became more of a thing, but that was still pretty niche, mainly because of the UI. It wasn't as accessible.
Right.
Then blog comments came. That was a more convenient and easier way. And now we have things like Reddit, different
like
social media, Twitter. And has the internet, how big of a part has that played in the tribalism of consoles? Because for me, I didn't really see it in like the early forum days, but definitely when it became like blog comments and social media, that's when things got like really out of hand.
Yeah, I feel like I kind of mentioned it earlier with the kind of Mike Tyson comment, right? Like there's just been such a long time of people being able to kind of like, the early days of the internet, like you said, like there wasn't as much kind of just general like shit talking, like hardcore rooted fanfare, fanism, all that stuff. And then now it just seems like that's a piece of everybody's psyche. And it just kind of like, it's kind of like when you get pissed off in the car and you yell terrible things in your car that you would probably never say outside of the safety of your car, right? It's that same mentality of being me too, right? But like behind the keyboard too. But now that mentality is bled into being a fan of anything. And I think because gamers are naturally so, I don't want to say hot tempered because it's not like a temper thing, but like
Passionate,
right? Like everybody's just like, when you're playing something, you're into it, like you're in. And I think that just additional layer of a generation of people that have kind of come up with not even having to think, should I say this? Should I not say this? Right? Where all of us came up in a generation of like, you kind of, make sure that you're saying the right things and not being a dick for the most part, if you're a good human. Right. And I think a lot of us now, like you see people like being really, heated online, like it just seems like it's a generation after, at least for me, for ours, right? Because like I don't care about things like that, but everybody else kind of came up with this. Like the moment they were on the internet, it was the Wild West and a free for all. You could say whatever you wanted without having any repercussions.
Right. I always say this thing, like the internet has been great for giving a voice to the voiceless. Unfortunately, it's also given a voice to people who should just shut the fuck up.
Like, oh God. Yeah. You don't need a Twitter account person or whatever.
Yeah.
Like it just stop. Right.
Yeah. I think we all have that relative that we're like, I wish they never discovered Facebook. Nobody would know how awful they were. I love him, but he's still one of my favorite uncles, but he's kind of out there.
Yeah, or like, now all my relatives get to know how deep and dark down the rabbit hole my mind goes, right?
How about you, Paul? What did you think internet culture has played a part?
I think it's entirely because of that. I mean, because before, like if Rolling Stone in 1975 wrote a negative review of the new Led Zeppelin album, 3-4 issues later, there might be one angry letter about like whatever, but there was no back and forth, and there was not, and the people were kind of gatekeepers.
Right.
The people at Rolling Stone would go, yeah, you know what, we're not going to run this one. In fact, I had a personal experience like that because there was, when I worked 30 years ago, I worked at a music magazine, and there was this one guy who got angry all the time with me. He used to sign his letters, "Your Nemesis." And a lot of
You have
times,
a nemesis. That's
I had a nemesis. Who knew? And
Literally.
we ran like I think 1 or 2 of his letters, and then we got one where he basically threatened to cut my testicles off. And my editor was like, "Yeah, we're not going to run this one."
Cowards.
And we, and we only had like a limited amount of space anyway, and whatnot. So you didn't have the stuff. I mean, now you put it online, everybody sees it.
Yes.
It isn't like in the old days where you would bitch and moan at the barber shop or bitch and moan when you're with your friends at the comic book store.
Did you
or
see
at
that
a bar.
or that issue, or did you read that one story where they taught like it wasn't as available?
Right.
Like,
you didn't have like the access, and whatnot. And, also like you had people back then, again, like let's bring up comic book guy who would bitch and moan about stuff, but he'd have no way of venting. Like he'd vent to it, like, the 2 people he hangs out with, but who cares? And now you can do it. But also, like Max said, you can say it in the worst possible way and there are no repercussions.
Right.
You know, you can criticize the new, Beyonce country music album, and in doing so, say something racist or prejudiced, and nothing happens. Whereas if you had done that, in the barber shop, somewhere, 30 years ago, everybody would look at you like, you fucking dick. And you'd kind of go, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that.
And plus, going with that example of the guy that threatened to take your testicles off, which is a story I love now, by the way.
Yeah.
Your editor gets that letter, you throw it away, you're done with it. But if
Right.
it's on the internet, it can be brought up 2 years later, 5 years later, again and again and again. And it basically can live forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is a good and bad thing about the internet. I love that so much information is accessible, but we all have to be careful because we've all said and done stupid shit in our youth. And, we might have a bad day, or what was Roseanne's excuse for being racist? Her medication or something? I forget what it was.
Yeah. That was her excuse the first time, not the seventh time.
Yeah. But apparently there's all these medicines that can make you racist for a day.
Yeah.
Who knew?
I know.
Now, the stuff with gaming and being argumentative about your favorite console has been going on for a long time, but it seems to have almost been a precursor to other aspects of culture. Politics immediately comes to mind.
Right.
That it's never been more divisive in America and certain parts of Europe, and were gamers just simply ahead of their time on being angry about things that don't matter, or was this stuff always there and that's just today's world that brought it out?
I was trying to think about all the different sort of pop culture rivalries that have been in existence, and almost all of them that I came up with were either good-natured or there wasn't really much anger between the different sides. Star Wars versus Star Trek, DC versus Marvel, the Rolling Stones versus the Beatles. And then I struck upon the East Coast, West Coast rap war. Now, but here's the thing to remember about the East Coast, West Coast rap war. It got violent.
Yes.
Okay.
People died.
It got violent between the people that were making East Coast and West Coast rap. Most of the fans didn't give a shit. Okay, there's probably a couple of guys in Compton who wouldn't buy, a Run DMC album, and there's probably a bunch of guys in the Bronx that wouldn't buy a Tupac album. But everywhere else, people bought it both. There wasn't like a guy in Texas who was like I'm down with the BX, so I'm not buying that NWA album. It just didn't happen, and
although that would be an interesting world if rival game developers wanted to fight each other.
I do know that somebody beat the crap out of UE Bowl once or tried to, but that's something completely different. But like you don't see like this kind of anger between people unless there's like something else going on there. Like, okay, this is a weird example, but I'll use it anyway. Here in LA, we have a big football stadium called SoFi Stadium. And last summer, Beyonce sold out multiple shows. Taylor Swift sold out multiple shows. Metallica sold out multiple shows. But because of the way Metallica's stage was set up, they could have more people in the SoFi at any given time. And so they issued a press release saying Metallica holds the record for the most number of people at SoFi Stadium for a single event. You didn't see Swifties attack Metallica. You didn't see Beyonce fans. You didn't see Beyonce fans attack Metallica. Now, if Metallica had issued a statement saying "fuck you, Beyonce and Taylor Swift," sure, they would have.
Maybe a different story. Yeah,
that'd be right. But that's only because they were attacked. Right. so that's the weirdness about the gaming thing, is that you have people who have no stake in the game getting angry over this stuff, and meanwhile the people who do have a stake in the game are like, whatever.
Personally, I would put my money on the Swifties if those three factions ever fought.
Yeah, it's a lot of
Metallica fans are old now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
She certainly has the numbers.
I go with the Bayhive on that one, I think.
Now,
but this is the thing. Like the people at Microsoft and the people at PlayStation, like, yes, they want their consoles to do well. They want their consoles to sell more than the other guys, but they don't hate each other.
Yeah, there's no inherent will like built into it. They just want to do well independently.
And I guarantee you that like a lot of those guys, of the ones that are the executives who play games, they probably have both consoles. And they probably also have a Nintendo, and they probably also got a sweet gaming rig on PC.
Yeah.
Our old friend Seamus Blackley, when he worked at Microsoft, he always cheekily wore a PlayStation shirt underneath his dress shirt just as a gag, and didn't tell anyone this for years. And I always thought that was hilarious. Now, Paul, you brought up an interesting point of other examples of tribalism, the Star Trek, Star Wars.
Right.
Some of the other ones I thought of, definitely sports teams are like that too. There are some rivalries like that in music, like Beatles versus Stones, although never as bad as PlayStation versus Xbox.
Right. Well, I did a little research on the Beatles Stones thing. They were friends. In fact, the Beatles wrote a song called "I Want to Be Your Man" in 1963 and gave it to the Stones. And it was so early in their careers that when the Beatles got around to recording it themselves, it was only on their second album. So there was no rivalry there between those guys.
I meant among the fans, not necessarily them.
But even among the fans, like, I don't know that anybody was sitting there going, like, I'm not buying the Beatles' new albums because I'm a Rolling Stones fan. Like, I just don't see that happening. You mentioned sports, and I don't think in terms of sports. I didn't think of this. I mean, I know that like there is kind of that Boston, New York rivalry.
Yes, absolutely. And I was born in the Bronx, grew up in New York, and Boston is crap, along with all their sports teams. So that's the only thing that I've seen that I can think of long term that is similar to the console wars rivalry. Mac, do you have any examples that you think work into play?
Not anything that we kind of haven't already like touched upon, right? Like it really is kind of everywhere you look, right? Like I could say even when I joined Turtle Beach, there was, my whole job is to create more Turtle Beach fans, right?
Right.
And but like it's funny because like we have guys that I've worked with that are now over at one of our competitors, and they're doing a lot of the same stuff that we're doing, and we all know that each of us are doing the same thing. So again, it's like a healthy competition. But really, I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with like I think the tribalism definitely. I think gamers, to answer that question, we're certainly ahead of the curve, right? Earlier than everybody else. I think. There was a lot of us playing single player offline games in the early days. And then the moment that like the multiplayer, side of things kind of came online, like that's the generation that we're early adopters. So again, like, and then there's a lot of people who play the games because that's their happy place and they don't like being out in the world, a little bit more sensitive to everything else in the world. So like, you take that mentality and then you kind of open the floodgates of being able to just kind of become married to whatever your favorite thing is that you're playing or working on or part of at that point. And then that tribalism just kind of presents itself. But yeah, I think everybody who was playing games was like that early generation, first wave of web, internet users, and probably the leading edge on the kind of expansion of tribalism from that point on.
That is an excellent point about the multiplayer generation that I hadn't thought of, because I do primarily enjoy that single player solitary experience more, but there's a whole different type of gamer that is all about the multiplayer. That is gaming to them. And you see that a lot today, even in stuff like, Minecraft and things like that, where gaming is a community experience from the get-go for a lot of these players. So that is an interesting point. So you almost have to participate in it from the start. Now, Paul, I wanted to share this story with both of you, but I think you were at this event, Paul, where a bunch of us went to LucasArts to check out some games. And it was mostly people in the video game press, but they also invited this one Star Wars fan site. And they became the nerd at this event. And we were totally, the video game people were picking on the Star Wars fan people, and it was so horrible. Like, I would go up to them and like, hey guys, live long and prosper and whatever.
I remember this. Yeah.
And then we were like, had this play fight, me and our friend Tom Ham. We're like, no way, dude, Captain Picard could totally kick Captain Kirk's ass. What are you talking about? It's like, what do you guys think, Star Wars fan site? And we
crying in the corner.
There's actually a t-shirt company called T-Shirt Hell.
Ooh.
And they make these shirts. They have a whole series of them where it's like an image from Star Wars, but it says Star Trek in the Star Trek logo underneath it. Like they have another one that where it's Kiss, but it says Led Zeppelin underneath it. Like,
that's funny.
I do remember that event. Yeah.
No, since both of you are comic book nerds too, how about the DC Marvel divide? And there's some fanboyism there. Not for me personally. I love both companies, but
that it's a hard one for me because I wasn't a comics guy until I started working, predominantly on the video games in my early days at Activision, and then just because I was a good student, right? Like I was like, okay, well, I got to brush up on all this stuff, so I started getting comics at that point, and then even then that was mostly Marvel, and but I've still always been a fan of DC. Like those are the cartoons on Saturday morning that we watched growing up, right?
Yeah.
So it's always a good mix of which, to me, it's what characters you move. I've never been tribal between DC or Marvel because again, it's in the same boat. I just want to see at the very least for the characters that I like, and I don't care what universe they're in.
Right.
I just want to see more of those stories, and there's going to be shitty characters on each side of the equation. I don't care about those. I hate them both equally. But you can't tell me Batman and Superman and that group are not just as fun and important to watch as your Iron Mans and your Hulks and your other key characters from the Marvel side. So I see the fanism, on that side of things, and that's one of those ones that bugs me and I hate it because I just generally like the good superheroes on both sides.
Now, Paul has a bit of a different perspective. Not that he hates one side or the other, but you clearly, Paul, have a Marvel preference in comics.
Wait. Let me clarify this. Okay. I like more of the Marvel characters.
Right.
Sure.
But the DC characters that I like as much as I like my favorite Marvel characters. So very specific,
totally.
For example, I love Batman. I love Wonder Woman. I really like Superman. I like a lot of the Bat Friends.
Right.
Beyond that, they a lot of the DC characters I don't particularly care about.
My favorite DC character. Oh, sorry. I thought you were done, Paul.
Right.
Go.
Whereas with Marvel, I like pretty much almost all their characters, all their major characters. But I don't like all of them equally. To me, I love Batman and Spider-Man just as much. I love, Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel, and Ms. Marvel just as much. So it's more of a numbers thing than
right.
that. And it's interesting that we're having this conversation because there's been times when they've done books where they cross-pollinate.
Yeah.
like there was, I think, a Superman. I know like there's been like Batman and Daredevil did a book, and Spider-Man did a book with Superman and
Right, and they had
Thor.
that whole amalgam run where they
Right.
had all kinds of crossover.
And it's interesting that we're talking about this now because it was just announced earlier this week or late last week. They're doing a big giant book with all of that stuff, including a bunch of those things that have been out of print for like 30 years of like Marvel and DC. But to go back to what we were talking about, yeah, you have people that pick sides on this stuff, but they don't get angry with each other. Or rather, they get a little like spirited, you know, like how could you say that Batman would beat up Spider-Man? Like, but they don't like start throwing punches. They don't like kick each other in the balls. Like,
Because it's
you know
still
what I mean? It's spirited, and yeah, it can be enthusiastic, but there's no like anger there. Like you don't like, unless that person argues in such a way that they become a dick.
right.
Like you don't end up hating that person. Like you hate them because they're a dick. You don't hate them because they like a comic book that you don't like.
That's how I don't understand. Like again, like go back to like one of the recent fights at like a stadium where like some fan said something about somebody else's fan and somebody threw a punch and then that guy fell and hit his head and died. And like,
Oh,
man, like that's just not worth it. I don't know if I care or hate anything that much like to like be a shit about it. It's interesting.
Carlos has an interesting point here. He says maybe not traditional comic readers, but fans that only follow the movies, I feel, are very tribal.
Well,
in my experience,
kind
it's
of.
actually the opposite, because I find that people that read the comics have like a more knowledge to draw from, so they can get more nitty gritty with the stuff they argue about that still doesn't really
Well,
matter.
there's a contingent of people that really, really love the Zack Snyder DC movies.
Yeah, those are just weirdos.
And they can get very tribal about that stuff versus the other stuff.
Right.
But the weird part is the Marvel fanboys, when it comes to people that are just into the movies and TV shows, they don't really care. They're like, oh, DC, who cares? Whatever. Like they don't get like angry about it. Like there's a phrase that people use a lot with this discussion, butthurt.
Yes.
And that's like, you see that with the Zack Snyder people. Like they get very butthurt when like the Marvel movies make $1 billion and get like accolades, and like the DC Snyderverse movies like don't and whatnot. It to go bring it back to gaming, it reminds me of when I did a lot of stuff for G4 and X-Play. They would often get accused of having a pro-Microsoft, anti-PlayStation bias.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember talking to Adam Sessler about it, and what we basically kind of took it back to was that it was really a fight between Killzone fans and Halo fans.
Huh.
Or more specifically, Killzone fans that were angry that Killzone games got lower review scores than Halo. The irony being that if you asked anybody that ever made a Killzone game, they would tell you, oh yeah, the Halo games are better than ours. Even they thought that, you know what I mean? Like, but it was like this weird thing. And like it kind of goes back to like the disingenuousness. Like you had to know your game, that those games weren't liked as much as anybody else's, that like, because it wasn't just X-Play that gave those, they gave better scores to the Bungie era Halo games versus the Killzone games. It was everybody. It was every outlet. So
Carlos says, yes, we all know Killzone was the best. This is actually a recurring joke from, I met Carlos in the G4TV.com forums, and there was a very loud, passionate Killzone contingent there. So all the remasters happen, Sony. Thanks. Zach Morris brings up a point. I always enjoyed Marvel's heroes more than DC's, and DC's villains more than Marvel's.
That's a good point.
That's interesting. So I did want to bring that up. My perspective on comics is really similar to my perspective of games. I don't care about the publisher. I don't care about the console company. In comics, I follow primarily writers. I don't care if Mark Waid is writing for DC or Marvel. I will read Mark Waid's stories. Same with games. I care more about the developer than what platform it's published on.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's what matters to me.
Yeah.
Not
The only time I've ever had preferences about that stuff is from a practical matter. For example, right now, if somebody someone offers me review code and they'll say what console do you want? Or what system do you want? And a lot of times I will say PlayStation 5. And it is entirely because on PlayStation 5, when you capture video, you can capture almost an hour. And on Xbox, you can only capture a minute. And for me, I use these videos to do screen grabs for screenshots and to make promo videos. So being able to capture an hour is way easier than having to capture a minute.
Yes.
With a minute, I can and that's literally the only reason. That's if Microsoft suddenly said, "Oh, now you can capture for an hour," I'd be like, "All right."
Well, I mean, for me, given that choice, I would pick PlayStation also, just because the controls are more comfortable to me than the Xbox controller. I've always liked.
For me, they're the same. For me, they're the same. But it's funny that you mentioned that because there was a point where I think it was the era of the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 where I really liked the Xbox controller and I didn't like the PlayStation controller. So I was always asking for Xbox code. But, and I'm sure I went through this with Mac at some point. If somebody said, well, I don't have any more Xbox codes, I only have PlayStation, I'd be like, okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I didn't care that much,
Yeah. I mean, it's important to have we all have preferences. But
it's kind of funny because if I think back to the consoles that made me, right, the game systems that made me, I would go in order of listing Commodore 64, right, Magnavox Odyssey, the original Nintendo NES, and then I would go to PlayStation, and then it's funny because in my head I wouldn't list, even though they were there kind of in the back, PC has always kind of been in the background, even though it was Commodore 64 was early PC stuff. But then I don't think of Xbox. I don't have a thing in my head that says, oh, when Xbox came out, I started playing these games. What I do have in my head, and dates all of us, is I remember playing God of War and the big PlayStation games are the ones that I recall playing and think that's what really kind of continued my journey into gaming. But even if I don't see Xbox, and I have an Xbox in the other room, I play it all the time. I was playing it earlier before this call, but the same thing, I don't have this perceived it's less than or worse than or better than. It's just I have one because there's games that I want to play on it that were only available on that system. So, yeah, it's just strange how Xbox doesn't register until my memory as I remember when Xbox came out and the games that everybody remembers Halo, but that's kind of it for me.
I wonder though if that's more of a function of age than anything else.
Just that I'm losing my memory because I'm old.
No. Just that things like that become less important as you get older.
Well, he mentioned God of War also. I mean,
right, but it's how when you're a kid, you watch the same movie 87 times.
Oh,
well,
yeah.
And then you get older and you see it once and you're like, all right.
Yeah,
and by the way, more of a function of economics. You watch a movie when you're a kid 20 times because you can afford to, or when we were kids. Now with streaming, you can watch anything whenever the hell you want.
Weird thing too, right? Again, I remember you could anytime Star Wars was on, you would oh, I just gotta sit and watch. What it doesn't matter which one too. Any one of 4, 5, or 6, you would just fucking stop what I'm doing and watch it. And now that you can watch it any fucking time you want, you're like, eh.
It is weird like that, huh?
Yeah.
Now, question for you guys and for everyone watching: why do some gamers care so much about all of this stuff? Why does it matter? Why do they care, or why do they pretend to care? I don't understand.
Go, Paul.
Oh, I was going to say that this again, to sound like a broken record, I think it goes back to the whole sort of like participation trophy thing where people sort of invest so much of their identity into being a PlayStation owner, being an Xbox owner. And when they see the other guy winning, it just infuriates them. Like, I mean, I do think there's, like I mentioned earlier, I do think there's some legitimate concerns, that if you buy a console and then like a game's, if you bought an Xbox and then you find out the new Final Fantasy isn't going to come to Xbox, you're like, oh, man, especially if you can only afford one console. But I think more so it's just people just really tie their identity into certain things now, into certain fandoms. Yeah. And when somebody says, yeah, I'm just not that into it, they get angry. And I understand that to a certain extent. You know what I mean? Like if I'm talking to somebody and they're like, yeah, I never really got into Robot Chicken. I'm like, oh, but then it passes because I'm an adult and I don't really care that much. If you like Robot Chicken, great. If you don't, that's great too. I don't care.
How about you, Mac? Why do you think people care or pretend to care so much?
If you like looked at it through that lens of gamers, and I'm just thinking out loud, wondering, but like, there was an era where being a gamer wasn't like popular, right? It was kind of considered the nerdy thing, and we were all part of that group at one point or another. And I feel like at some point, like the gaming kind of culture became accepted, and that crowd finally had something that they could like glom onto, whether it was PlayStation, Xbox, a particular game, this or that. But they kind of like got recognition and they could glom onto it, and they were stoked to finally kind of have like a feeling of like belonging, if you want to call it like that.
Yeah, and for sure.
If somebody shits on that belonging for something else, right? For the competitor, this or that, maybe it cuts a little bit deeper with them because, again, like you're talking about a group who finally like has like, I finally fit in, I finally have a thing, a reason, like something that is accepted, and then, well, wait, you're shitting on this? No! And it just kind of becomes a little bit more explosive because it's more a part of the gaming community than, I guess, like, if you look beyond that like maybe some other, non-gamers get attached to certain things one way or another. But I still think like sports, right? Like that's another one that is just as magnetic in terms of how, people just get attached and so.
Right.
But I would also point out, to reference to what Mac just said, like I think there's also a segment of people who they think of this thing as my thing. Yeah. And then other people have started to come into it. And like, you saw that, especially when games started to become really, really mainstream popular. And like, but the games that became popular were not the games that would have been popular years earlier. Like the Japanese games and RPGs and hardcore gaming became kind of off to the side and got, subsumed by Madden, Call of Duty, and Grand Theft Auto, which are the kind of three big games that the mainstream kind of play. And so you had these like angry people that would get pissy about that. It's kind of like you seeing that now to a certain extent with anime, where like, anime has become very mainstream, but like the old school hardcore people who, are getting angrier and angrier because they can't get the anime that they, because everybody's talking about, this anime or that anime or whatever. They're not talking about like the anime that I grew up with, and it has to do with a lot of like personal identity and not handling it well when other people aren't like into the stuff that you like, or you hate something and like everyone's all like jumping all over. You know what I mean? Like if you hate Taylor Swift right now, you're probably stewing in your juices because everybody loves her and she's everywhere and
right. But I mean, I think that's straying from the point that Mac brought up, which I think was excellent, and I hadn't considered that. When we grew up and in our early days working in the gaming business, like gamer was a specific thing. It was still not yet a mainstream thing. It very much is now. Whereas I wouldn't even really use the term gamer anymore, because I will assume that anyone under 50 plays games at some point.
Oh yeah.
Like you don't say I'm a movie goer. Everyone watches movies, or I'm a TV enthusiast. Whereas you applied that to games for a long time, and even though there is still an older generation, many of whom have political power, that see like violent video games as, you know, as the devil.
Yeah. Well, I've been on.
But it is a generational thing, and I wonder if it's a mixing of generations is where part of the friction comes from. I'm not sure. Now let us get out of here on this. Like this console fanboyism or fanboyism, fanaticism, tribalism in general. Are we all just doomed to argue about shit and eat ourselves as a society? Like, how can this conversation get better? Will gamers get better? Will people that argue about things, will they do it more constructively? What is needed? Does the world need a moderator? Like,
I think it's important to remember something about this, that it's not the vast majority of gamers that engage in this stuff. It's not even, you know, a large number of them. It is a very small but very vocal group of people. And that's true for any of this kind. You know, you see this with the tribalism that you see in political circles. The sort of most extreme of it. Again, it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and these people squeal like hell. I don't think that it's going to go away anytime soon, because they do get the attention, and they're incentivized to say something and to do something. You know, you're not suddenly going to have Reddit and social media and forums go away. It's not going to happen. You know, okay, yeah, maybe Twitter will go away, but something else will take its place.
Fingers crossed.
You know, I mean, you know, right now, you know, it used to, there's like what, 20, 25 different social media sites out there.
Nuts.
You know,
I think that's what you hit the nail on the head earlier, Paul, right? It's like, it's a combination of the generate, you know, to answer your question, right? Yes, we're all doomed. But like, it's that small but vocal kind of minority that now also has 25 different avenues of megaphones to like make their anchor and their snark and opinion heard about it, right? Which is the downfall of society based on social media, right? And then the other thing to like, you know, it's the same thing, right? Like think about, which is, has all of this haterade and you know, like hardcore fan, has it always all been there to the same levels? And now we all just know about it because we get to hear it through social? Or is it now all much more prominent because social media has enabled everybody to share all their thoughts, right? And so,
yes,
right. And I think that's the sad answer, which is like, you know, people forgot the kind of genuine golden rule, like be a good human, be like, you know, be excellent to each other, as Bill and Ted would say. But
yes,
most people don't approach the world through that lens anymore, right? It's again, it's that single player kind of mentality, like main character syndrome. And it just is amplified because of like all the you know, again, there's a good amount of people that honestly should legally not be allowed to share their thoughts just based on their intellectual levels, you know, like, but everybody has that avenue, everybody has that microphone to, you know, and again, when it's the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and when all these people start getting upset or fanny about like their thing, like, you're going to hear it. And I don't know if there's a solution or a way around that until, like we said, there are some consequences for being a dick. You know?
Well, I will say this. There is a sort of pushback on this kind of stuff. And I have found it very heartening that certain groups have kind of gotten to the point where they're like, yeah, whatever. Disney, for example, like Disney gets crap for different things that they've done in their movies and their shows.
Sure.
And now they seem to have this attitude of like, yeah, whatever. You know, oh, you're angry that there's a black girl in The Little Mermaid. Yeah, so what? we're going to put a black girl in Lilo and Stitch, and we're going to put a black girl in Star Wars, and then a black girl in Marvel, and all this other stuff, because that's what we want to do. That's what the vast majority of people want to see, you know, and those things have not usually suffered from it. You know, Star Wars still does really well. Most of them, up until recently, Marvel was doing really, really well, despite all the wokeness.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like, you know, and I feel like that's why those people are getting even angrier, because now they're being ignored.
Hmm.
You know, and that's you know, they're getting pissier and pissier about it.
I use the saying, you know, at work all the time. Basically, it's just oh man, I just forgot what I was going to say now. Move on. Next thing. It'll come back to me.
No, I think the solution here that is quite clearly the internet needs a hippie movement.
There is. You can't win the internet. I say that it'll work all the time, because again, I've said it for a while now, but like whether it's a product that's being reviewed, right? Like you're never gonna, no matter what, there could be the best product in the world. This could be a car, could be a controller, could be a beanie, like whatever it is, and you're never gonna get 10s out of 10s from everybody. You're never, like, there's always going to be somebody who's got a different opinion that stands out from the rest. And I always just say, like, at that point, I'll get emails from people and they're like, oh, what are we doing about this? I'm like, I'm not doing shit about that. Like, you can't win the internet. I'm not worried about that when everybody else is saying it's this. And it's a strange bench, because, again, I think, like, Paul, you were talking about, like, oh, if something happened, like, you know, like a bad review would happen in the past, like people would call, people would talk about it. And then there would be, like, sometimes if there was a justification for, like, an update, or like, you know, if the piece of information was wrong or misunderstood, then you could get something, you know, corrected, or alternatively say, hey, look, like that's our opinion, we're sticking to it. And now it's like, you know, now you just kind of have that same approach where, well, like, I'm not going to get at this point, we're not going to get most people to change their mind, let alone want to go spend the extra 5 minutes to go back and update and correct a story or a review or something like that. So it's just kind of like, it is what it is. Like, you're never going to win everybody. But as long as mostly everybody's kind of singing the tune that we want to hear, then we're great.
Mac, did you just take one of Trump's mental acuity tests? Because they were like, car, controller, beanie. Like,
I did. I was literally just looking around the screen here.
So I think you're qualified to be president now. So that's
he's not old enough.
Oh,
no, I got to get way older.
Carlos add, yeah, just send the T-800s to go after those tribal toxic people. How about a tribe of toxic people? Gather them up now. We can't.
I mean, until everybody just ignores them, like, they're not going to go away. You know, as long as one person kind of responds to them.
Well,
you know, there's always been dicks, and there's always going to be dicks.
And some people, some outlets, some social media services encourage this with things like clickbait because it makes them money. So
right.
Oh, yeah. It's the headline that shows up first. Right?
Yeah. Yes. So yeah, I guess we are all doomed. is the bottom line. My internet hippie thing won't work. Maybe next time. I do want to thank everyone that left comments. Carlos, Zach Morris, thank you guys for hanging out. Please like and subscribe. If you enjoyed this video, follow Paul. Go to paulsemmel.com. Check out Mac's products at turtlebeach.com and drop us a line. Let us know what you want to do next. There's a bunch of nerd things going on. Star Wars Bad Batch dropped this week. Dune 2 is out next week. Is that right?
Dune 2.
Yes. The first.
The new season of Halo is already going.
Yes. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is next week. I cannot wait for that game.
Not quite as gamery or anything like that, but there's like the Masters of the Sky show, which is about
that's what Elvis also, right?
That's you can't give up the Elvis accent. I was in that. It was actually pretty good though. If you're ever a fan of that like Memphis Belle movie from way back when, this is kind of like almost like a contemporary reboot of that in a series version. So that's been pretty cool.
And I almost want to use my movie pass to see Madam Web just to see how shitty it
I've
is.
heard it's so bad that it's great. That was the one review there I was like, that kind of sold me. I would probably go see it for that because I just want to see like what I want to go and just see like what part gets so bad that I start laughing.
Yeah, I would be like, how can something be worse than Morbius? Come on, show me. We got one last comment. Ooh, part 2 of season 2 of Invincible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, March 13th. Excellent call. That's been too long. What was it? December, like the last episode of that season?
Okay, Ray, I'm going to ask my usual homework follow-up question. Have you gotten the chance to watch the TV series Wayne?
Wayne, I have not. I'm still on the Loudermilk kick. I have not finished
Loudermilk, but like it got like kind of to an almost too serious point. Really funny and dark, and then it got like funny, dark, but kind of too serious. And then it started to get like a little bit less serious and more funny. So like I need to reinvest in that now.
Quick thoughts. Did you guys catch the I know Paul caught the Borderlands trailer. How about you, Mac?
I saw the trailer and I don't know how to feel about it.
That's literally exactly what I said on social media. I don't know how to.
It's strange because I've played the Borderlands games. I'm not as quite of like a Borderlands fan as per se like maybe other games, right? Like that I play a lot more frequently. But I'm familiar. But like there's just I don't know how to feel about that trailer. It didn't give you a whole lot other than naming some celebrities that are playing some of the characters. But it didn't do a lot to tell me like what the fuck is that movie gonna actually be about. I know it's like some kind of treasures buried somewhere. Yeah, it just seemed like strange to me. And some of the casting, like I love Jack Black, right? That felt great. But some of the other characters in those roles were like, really? Okay. So
my big issue was I didn't feel Claptrap was claptrappy enough.
Okay.
And I don't think that the Tiny Tina was Tiny Tina-ish enough.
Right. That was
in terms of not being Tina or tiny enough for you.
In terms of not being a tiny, angry psycho chick.
Yeah,
right.
I mean, Tiny Tina in the games is just unhinged.
Yeah, she's unplugged.
and I like the woman they got to play her. She was really good in Barbie, as America Ferrera's daughter in Barbie, and
young Gamora, and
she's young Gamora. Well, she didn't have much to do as young Gamora, and she was better as young Ahsoka. But like, it's I don't know.
And it was Helen Mirren, right? That was the other. Who was the other? Who was
Kate
the main?
Blanchett.
Kate Blanchett. So I don't want to go with Helen Mirren. That just it. I don't know why I've liked her in the past, but like. It just didn't click to me. I don't know why.
I kind of am hoping that it's going to be like when she played Hela in Thor.
I would love that. That would be great.
Because if you remember, we were all kind of like, wait, what? Kate Blanchett in a Marvel movie? And then she came out and she just ate that shit up.
Yeah. And then what if she was even more hilarious in that role?
Yeah.
I'm going to table my opinion on that subject until I
I mean
more times. I
will see it, and this is kind of weird, but I will see it because I'm a big Bobby Lee fan and I want to support him. But I fully expect the movie to be garbage. It's been delayed like 3 times already, and there were reshoots, which is a normal thing, but my expectations are low.
Do you guys go see movie? Like, will you actually like go to a movie theater and see a movie at this point? Because like I'm more mindset to always unless it's like big, like I'll go see Deadpool the moment it opens because I'm an idiot. But
no, I have one of those movie passes. So if I don't go once a week, I feel like I'm ripping myself off.
That's actually good. I like that. Oh, sure.
With that movie, I want to see one more trailer before I decide. Like I know I'm already planning on going to see Dune in theaters next week.
Okay.
And I will go see Deadpool in theaters.
Paul, are you going to get the Dune popcorn bucket that looks like a fleshlight?
I kind of feel like I have to. Like,
I mean, now
I don't know if they have that where I go. I don't know if they have that at the Grove. Although it makes me wonder what the Deadpool one is going to be like, because Ryan Reynolds is like, you got to top that.
Yeah.
Like you're going to be pulling popcorn out of Deadpool's butt or something.
Yeah.
Whoa. I envision that.
Come on, you can see it. Him bent over.
That's hollowed out. You're just pulling popcorn out of it.
Yeah.
Or the drink topper. Just have the straw go in his butt and then you're sipping from
it. Yep. That's going to be a thing.
So guys, let me know what you thought of the Borderlands trailer. If there's anything you liked, didn't like, did it scare you? Did it make you feel funny inside? Please leave a comment, let us know. And we will be back next week talking about more nerd stuff, unless I decide to take a month off to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
See y'all later.